is the 4th annual Charles K. Atkin Distinguished Speaker Series, but the event actually goes well beyond 4 years ago. In fact, it was in the early 90s that we established this fundraiser that we call Bowling for Scholars. That event is now gone, but that event was actually started very nearly after one of our former chairs, G.R. Miller, passed away from cancer. And so we started this event that would actually now endow a G.R. Miller scholarship for grad students, and some of you in the audience have been provided G.R. Miller funds. Well, after we ended the Bowling for Scholars event, and I don't know how many of you were even around when it was Bowling for Scholars. Yeah, okay, fantastic. That was a fun event. We actually had a person dressed up as a bowling ball. So
Dave Westerman.
Yeah. Well,
Dean,
you do. Dean Casaleas was probably my favorite, but that's probably.
Dave Westerman.
Oh, I meant Krikorian. Yes, absolutely. Anyway, that was fun. After that event ended, we actually started bringing in alum to speak, and that replaced the bowling event. Actually, for a little while, we actually bowled after they would speak, right? We turned that into what we called the Spring Colloquium Series, all right? And we would bring in alum or very close friends of the department to talk to us about their recent work or their body of work, as the case may be. When I came here in 2019, I was sitting in my office and talking to Brandon Vanderhyde, and we were talking about ways to bring our community back together because we were in the midst of COVID, all right? And a variety of things struck me at that time, right? One was that since we're bringing in people that are alum or very close friends of the department, maybe that should be around the same time as homecoming. Then it struck me, and I'll elaborate on this in a second, that there's some very important birthdays that happen in October. It simultaneously struck me that Spring Colloquium is not a very sexy name at all. Okay, that's just what it is. And so Brandon, who is here, even though he's on sabbatical, where are you, Brandon? All right, fantastic. Said, I think that we should name it the Charles K. Atkin Distinguished Speaker Series. And we brought that to the faculty, and there was a unanimous decision about that. So this does have a long history, but I just want you to understand that some of our former chairs of this department really are behind the legacy of this event. Chuck Atkin was born on October 24th of 1945, all right? Right here in East Lansing, although his early years were spent in both in Sault Ste. Marie as well as Birmingham, Michigan. Chuck loved maps, okay, so I'll show this map year after year, okay. And then he moved back to East Lansing, where he ended up spending most of his years. He was an undergraduate right here at Michigan State University. It was well known that Chuck bled green. He went to University of Wisconsin to receive his PhD, then returned right back here at 25 years old as a professor in this department. This department meant a great deal to Chuck, all right? He was chair of the department from 1995, I'm gonna guess, because I was here at the time, through 2012, when Chuck passed away. He earned every distinction that one could hope for. He was an ICA fellow. He was a distinguished professor of the National Communication Association. He was the Outstanding Health Communication Scholar, the NCA Applied Scholarship Award winner, the NCA Distinguished Book Award, the Distinguished Service Award from the National Commission on Drunk Driving. He won the Decade of Behavior Award from the American Psychological Association. It is he and his research that was behind the National Social Norm Center, which we have now moved into our department. He's testified and consulted to subcommittees of the Senate, House of Representatives, White House commissions, Surgeon General, and I could go on. He wrote 10 books and more than 150 articles and book chapters. He had external funding from all the major federal agencies and some foundations as well. But you know what? I remember him best for being our pitcher. He is a legend academically, but he was much more than that to many of us in this department who knew Chuck well and considered him to be a friend and a mentor. He was the person that pulled us together for football games on Fridays. He and Ron were the opposing quarterbacks. That was a whole thing. He was the pitcher of our softball team, and he greatly was appreciated for his hilarity, his quirkiness, and his dedication to every single graduate student and faculty member. Here's me and Chuck with our dogs. It was a couple of years ago, for sure. Chuck was very happily married to the distinguished Sandy Smith. And I'm just so proud and happy that we named this event after him. And I welcome you all again. Go green.
Go white.
White. And I'll turn it over at this point. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see all of you here in one place. It's very rare to see that. And I have the privilege to introduce our first speaker of the series this year. So yesterday I had the opportunity to eat dinner with him, and he shared the story of how when he was a PhD student here, he told his advisor, Dr. Bolster, at one point, "Tell the other faculty members that I am the future of this discipline." And now, about 15 years later, he is a distinguished scholar in our field, with expertise in pretty much everything social influence and persuasion related, as well as quantitative methods, meta-analysis, and I'm sure many more things that he couldn't list on the page. He has more than 65 citations. In fact, yesterday I actually opened his Google Scholar to try to count, and I failed because there were just so many things on there. And he has about 3,500 or so citations since 2019. So clearly, he's very distinguished, and we are very excited to have him. So without further ado, let's give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Sue. That was very kind, very generous introduction. If I'm ever feeling like I'm not doing much, I'm just going to call Sue and tell her, just give me that introduction again. I'm having a down day. I've got 4 rejection hours from today. All the journal editors hated me this week. Can you just give me a little bit of that introduction again? I feel better. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real honor to come here to the Chuck Atkin series. Chuck was my chair. I was here 2006, 2010. And I was thinking when Sandy was saying that, Spring Speaker Series is not really a fun title. But I always knew it was spring because of Chuck, because he was switched from the sweater to sweater vest. And that was how we knew that it was spring. We didn't need a calendar. And thinking of Chuck, I remembered his introductions always involved a map, like we just saw. Here's my map, which I was making this a few days ago the other day. I was thinking, I have really not lived much. My map is this little tiny cluster. So I started off in Belleville, near St. Louis, not too far from where your very own Frank Foster grew up. And I got my undergraduate degree at North Central College outside of Chicago. That's the first step in this little Google Maps journey. I actually majored in psychology and then went on to a communication master's at Northern University, where I studied with Dave Henningsen, who was a Michael Cruz student, and who was himself a Frank Foster student. And I thought, well, I should just go to the source instead of getting this, second-hand Frank Foster. And came up here to Michigan State, where I got my PhD in 2010, and then I got my first and so far only job at Western Illinois University, which is the last stop so far on my little map. We'll see where things go next. So super diffuser research, I said 19 years because this started, as far as I know, in 2005. I was talking to Mike Katowski about this the day, who gave me an eyewitness account when Frank Foster came to the research lab one day, this is before I was even here, with a copy of Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, and said that we're going to research this. He went on to explain what a maven was. People were really, well known or well respected by the people they know in some research area. Persuader, so you can adapt their message, and then a connector, somebody who knows a lot of different people and connects a lot of different groups. And then, at least according to Mike, Frank then turned to Mike and said, for example, Mike is not a connector. To help illustrate his point.
Sounds right.
It does sound right. And Mike agreed it was a fair assessment. And so we were starting to research, and then I came here in 2006 and began working on opinion leadership, which another MSU former colleague and faculty member, Ev Rogers, told us in the last edition of his book, Opinion Leadership is the degree to which an individual is able informally to influence other individuals' attitudes and overt behavior in a desired way with relative frequency. And what's interesting about that definition is he's basically saying, can you do a thing? Basically tell us how, or what it is that makes someone do that thing. It's an interesting definition, and it's entirely results focused. It's somebody who can cause this thing to happen. And basically, since Lazarsfeld, research has been trying to figure out what that thing is, how to do it, how do you get people to actually change their behavior with some sort of relative frequency. And informally is another important part of that definition. I mean, it's not hard for Monique to tell a graduate student to do what to do. She's the boss. But if you're a graduate student, get other graduate students to do things, then you might actually be an opinion leader. And so people have been trying to figure out for a long time, like what's the one thing, what's the one trait that makes you an opinion leader? And some of the early work, especially the classic work by Katz and Lazarsfeld, it was, do you give advice on a topic? Do people come to you for advice on a topic? Have you given advice on a topic? And they had a 2-item measure. There was, have people come to you for advice recently on a topic, something like politics, movies, health, fashion. And that was the initial focus, was people respect you enough on that topic to come to you for advice on it. Another perspective was you were just able to be persuasive in general. And there's a NAMS Botanic measure there. They have a generalized opinion leader. Can you just influence people in general? And then the Weiman citation there is for the strength of personality perspective, coming out of our German colleagues, who argue there's some people who just have a strong personality. They can get people to do stuff. And I remember reading those items in that measure and thinking, do you have to be so stereotypically German about this? It's very like, people do what I say because of my power. Okay. And then another third option is more rooted in network position. And Ronald Burt's work has been influential on this, thinking about people who connect groups into sort of a network graph, people who, there's a group over here, and he connects them over there. And he argued that those people are going to be particularly effective opinion leaders. But rather than thinking through, okay, what's the one thing that makes people particularly effective, you get the super diffuser model. So after Frank came to that research team, they started working on measures, and in 2006, I was kind of helping some of those studies as well. And they wanted to figure out, okay, what if somebody is actually good at all three of those things? Wouldn't that be better? To some extent, that was the thrust of Gladwell's book. And Bosser kind of read Gladwell's book, saw some of the flaws in it, because Gladwell's not a social scientist, he's a journalist, who's just kind of collating all these ideas about opinion leadership, threw them into a book. And we started working on these 3 conceptually distinct traits that if you are high on all 3 of these traits, we could label you as an opinion leader, and the model then predicts you to be effective at influencing others. So if you have these 3 traits, we think you'd be the kind of person you want to contact to, say, promote voting, for example, which is going on right now, or promote a vaccine, promote other kind of pro-social things, or hypothetically promote terrible things. It's the thing about persuasion research. It's whatever you're going to do with it, you're going to do with it. I actually was a graduate student, a couple years after these measures came out, was taking a survey for, I think, people make those French bread pizzas. Like I was a graduate student, I knew if I got enough points doing their surveys about their French bread pizzas, I would get free French bread pizzas. And I swear to you, I saw the super diffuser items in one of their surveys. So they were trying to find opinion leaders to promote French bread pizzas, I guess. I'm not sure what their plan was. And I had the the ethical conflict. Do I respond to this as though I am one, so maybe they'll send me French bread pizzas? Or should I be true to the research and be honest, because like Mike, I am also not a connector or persuader. So we have these three traits. The maven, some of the topic-specific expertise is recognized and sought by one social network on a given area. People come to them for advice. You have a friend you go to for advice on a car, on computers, on movies, anything, some specific area, and that's who you would turn to for advice. And if they then said, hey, here's this new thing about that area, you might listen. You're more likely to respect what they're going to say, at least hear them out. Hypothetically, if they're also persuasive, somebody can adapt easily and persuasive appeal to the audience and thereby find frequent persuasive success, sort of the persuasive success opinion leader. And one of the things that differed from Gladwell focused very heavily on sort of the nonverbal aspects of persuasion. That's certainly important, but we were focused more on how can they adapt their message to their audience, and they figure out what each person needs to hear. And this is one of the strengths of this perspective versus, say, a mass media campaign, is that mass media campaigns are somewhat differentiated at best, whereas this is tailored to each individual person, hypothetically, if our super diffusers are going out there and doing what we want them to. And the third piece, of course, is being connected. They have a lot of social networks across a variety of social groups. So to some extent, we're trying to combine the best of all three of these sort of classic ideas in opinion leadership into one single model where you'd say, this is the kind of person you want to recruit to then promote some behavior change. This has brought up the basic agenda of what super diffuser research model is trying to accomplish. And arguably for the past 19-ish years, we're working on three general tasks. One is accurately identifying super diffusers. And for each of those three traits, we've got 5 items that do a pretty good job of identifying them, and I'll tell you here in a little bit about some of the studies we've done to assess the fact that these are relatively valid measures. Find out what it is they do, because to some extent it's sort of a black box in the middle of this model. It's recruit super diffusers, tell them to promote something, step 2, step 3, behavior changes. And so we don't really know a lot about what it is that these effective interpersonal diffusers are doing. And the third thing is then, okay, let's start designing methods of recruiting them for a super diffuser-based diffusion campaign. How do we design basically intervention into a particular social network, say a university, a town, a city, some well-defined network. We can find super diffusers in that area and then encourage them to go out and promote things. So we'll talk about each of these general parts of the agenda in turn. So starting with accurately identifying them. So starting with the connector measure, initially Bostrep all validated these measures with self-reports, 5 items per construct as said. And the initial studies were trying to assess some level of construct validity and factorial validity. The connectors they found were very negatively associated with social anxiety, because it's kind of hard to be somebody who's out there making lots of friends and making lots of connections if you have social anxiety. So unsurprisingly negatively correlated, which is encouraging. And then initial studies found for them persuaders was positively related to argumentativeness, trait argumentatives from our comm colleagues. And then health mavens were positively related to value-relevant involvement using the Cho and Boster value-relevant involvement measure. Another Cho, again, you showed another prominent graduate of this program as well. So it's going to be a theme today is people who came from SU and then did helpful things for this project, as well as advice-giving opinion leadership measures and healthy lifestyle activism. So those were the kind of the initial round that was published in Journal of Comm. And also included an actual representative sample to test the factor structure as a final study. I should add, I haven't put in the slides because I wasn't involved in the study, but one of our colleagues here was recently involved in a 7-country replication of that factor structure. Shannon Cruz, one of our, again, 2015 graduate, and Brian Manata, and 2 other non-MSU people we don't need to mention, were on this great article that came out in HCR just this past year, showing that this factor structure holds in 7 different countries on, was it 3 continents? More than 3 continents? 5 continents. Literally everyone on Earth. Super diffuser, super diffuser. By everyone, I mean 7 countries.
It's a culturally universe.
It is. Possibly, maybe. For 7 countries at least, which is 6 more than we had so far. So thanks to the Cruz et al. Team to make my use easier in the future. And then roughly about 5% of the population tends to be super diffuser based on the somewhat arbitrary threshold of 25% percentile in each. So if you're in the top quartile of each of those 3 traits and distributions that you would get, you end up being about 5%. But mathematically it's smaller than that, but there is some overlap among these traits. So we end up with roughly about 5% of the population. So starting with that good base, we then went on to do other research, starting with the connectors. For one thing is they are generally more likely than non-connectors. And these are continuous measures. We're going to kind of dichotomize them just for the sake of presenting. but these are generally continuous variables, and we're usually talking about correlations here. So a connector is more likely to have people in their network recognize their names. And so we did this study. We had 2 studies where the initial one, we got superuser measures, and we asked them permission for user name in a future study. And we showed another sample their names. And so our second sample at the same university were more likely to recognize the names of connectors. So they literally are known by other people in their particularly targeted network. Samples of, I think, 561 and 189 in the second one. And then this was the study that was almost traumatizing what a pain in the ass it was. So shortly before I did the study, Facebook locked down their API to make it harder to do this kind of research. Because I was really hoping to do it the easy way, to scrape this data. So I couldn't do that. And so I got 100 people in a first-year dorm at my university to fill out a survey and then create a Facebook friend to an account I created just for this study. And then once a month for 9 months, I loaded every single one of their profiles and recorded whether or not they were friends that month with each other. So I created a full network graph 9 times from Facebook data, hand scraped. Yes, it's like that.
Do you need therapy?
I'm still.
Okay.
I mean,
That would be
I'll be
tough.
okay. I appreciate it. Be okay.
I was hoping.
This is part of the therapy, is talking about it. And the great part about that was it really only mattered to be a connector in the first month, so I didn't really need the other 8 months. But still, I got all 9 months. And in that first month, they were particularly active. That was when we were seeing connectors forming lots of connections a lot more quickly. And then in the other 8 months, I guess they went and made friends outside the dorm. And I remember also that when I was working with residence life people on this project, they were really insistent that I not call it a dorm. It's a residence hall, not a dorm. And now whenever I talk about this data, I call it a dorm out of spite. Another study we did, this is with Mike. This one's in press. They have a propensity to make friends and acquaintances, connect disparate groups, and have a higher network awareness. And these are a series of self-report measures that Mike and I gave a large sample of University of Tennessee students. I think we had about 700 in that one. The network and awareness measure, interesting measure that Mike Stefano over at Buffalo came up with. It's just the extent to which people literally know their broader network. It's an interesting thing to think about as individual different skill. Do you know who your friends' friends are? Could you accurately draw sort of a network map of your people you know and who they know? And he validated a good self-report measure, and it correlates with the connector measure, which we're happy to see. And another recent study it did with more MSU people, Tim Levine and Kim Sorota, as part of a larger study they were doing on deception, that they have higher extroversion scores. Unsurprisingly, people are really connected, more extroverted. I wasn't shocked either, but glad to see it. And then an interesting study was done recently by, this is with a broader team at Penn State. It was at the corner of a larger project they were doing in early COVID. This is Shinju and Rachel Smith and some other people. Rachel Smith, they're a proud MSU graduate. And we were looking at the extent to which people were interested in promoting mask wearing at Penn State. And one of the interesting connections we found for them, connectors, they were more likely to be susceptible to normative pressure. So they perceived an injunctive norm. The injunctive norm to behavior link was stronger among connectors, suggesting that they were more susceptible to normative pressure. It's kind of interesting. It wasn't one of those things we necessarily predicted per se, but thought was cool, and I think it's consistent with construct validity. And then persuaders, and I know this one didn't animate, but the persuader measure, they're more likely to be perceived by people they try to persuade as having better skills in persuading and explaining complex topics. And this today I did with a political science colleague at my university, where we got a bunch of undergraduates before an election, I think it was the 2012 election, but anytime they talked to somebody about their preferred candidates, they would hand them a piece of paper with a link to it. And people would go online and fill out this brief survey about what the interaction was like. So we had people handing out the pieces of paper, we had their super diffuser measures, and we had people that actually talked to as responses and what they thought of them. And so we found a positive correlation between their persuader measure they gave us, and then their people they talked to, the people that actually tried to persuade's assessment of how persuasive they were. And again, we found a positive correlation. But the sample size wasn't great, which is why it was not published in the greatest of journals. But it was published, which is the moral of the graduate students. No matter how many rejections you get, if you want to be able to cite that paper, you've got to get it published somewhere. And so it is actually out there in the world. They're also, oops, not that slide. have higher scores in conceptually related generalized opinion leadership measure and the strength of personality measures mentioned earlier. Those alternative ideas about just being generally persuasive correlates with those as well. It's that same study we did with the connectors that Mike Katowski and I have done recently. It's in press. Higher extroversion as well, and openness, but slightly lower agreeableness, which I thought was really interesting. The people who are like really interested in persuading people if they're good at it, a little lower on trait agreeableness. So they're basically, I think, willing to be a little annoying. Like people are really interested in persuading others are gonna have to like let go of being, you know, this sort of like make everybody get along kind of trait agreeableness kind of thing. Which is another one of those kind of surprising but interesting and helping us kind of flesh out what these people are like kind of results. Also, we haven't presented it yet, but we're about to send to NCA that same deception study. We found that persuaders were more likely to lie, but only if they think lying works. So we developed a lying effectiveness measure for this study, and they did actually lie more over a 3-month period at University of Wisconsin lacrosse students at least. Were more likely to lie if they're a persuader, but only if they thought lying works. People who are persuaders who didn't think lying works were less likely to lie. So there's a little more evidence there, very much like what works. And if it's lying, okay. Then on the flip side of the other study, they were less susceptible to conjunctive norm pressure. So the connectors, that mask wearing study in Penn State, more susceptible, persuaders less susceptible. So again, they're more willing to kind of do what they want to do, if it's going to piss people off, I guess. That's the persuaders. On to the evidence we have for the mavens. So again, mavens relative to non-mavens. These are correlations, not categorical variables. They're more likely to have people ask them for advice about their area, and for people in their social network to perceive them to know more about their area, and to have more objective knowledge about the area, and report engaging in more activism about their area. And then the first parts of that were medical stuff, and that last one I think was political issues. And this is an interesting study that we did with, I think, Mike Katowski's then wife's high school. Got a bunch of teachers to fill out measures, and then also tell us who they turn to for advice on health. And we found a correlation between the two. There's a really cool study that Mike helped us do, and we then published in 2015. Notice there's a lag sometimes. So I graduated in 2010, and that study wasn't a graduate student, and when Mike was a graduate student. So sometimes it takes a bit to get stuff out. That was like about an 8-year lag on that one. But again, be stubborn, keep sending stuff out. It will get published. And again, back to that study with the poli-sci professor, they were more likely to have people they try to persuade think they have higher knowledge about their area. So again, the Davis correlated to the extent that people did think they knew stuff about politics in that study. And in a fun study, it's my first study I did with Rachel Smith, they were more likely to try to persuade people about antibiotic-free meat. Like we basically explained what antibiotic-free meat was and asked them, do you want to tell people about this? And the mavens, who are health mavens, were like, yes, of course I want to tell people about antibiotic-free meat. That's awesome. Non-mavens were like, why am I going to start? You want me to start conversations with my friends about antibiotic-free meat? No, thank you. No. And the last one is a couple of studies I did recently with some of my graduate students. More likely to have a friend think they are mavens. And this is one of those wonderful studies where I got the graduate students started and then I just sat back, the data came to me. It's wonderful. So I had a poor graduate student wandering around the student union, walking up to anybody who looked like they were in pairs. They would hand one a survey with a 15-item super diffuser measure, and the other one of the survey said, does the person next to you for all of these items? And so we had a self-other correlation for all three traits, and we were particularly interested in the mavenness one, because the mavenness one is literally rooted in does your network think you know about this area? And so it had a decent-sized correlation between both your network, both the person, your perception of being a maven for our self-report measure, and this friend you have sitting next to you. And interestingly enough, it was not moderated by closeness. Like that correlation was just as strong, higher, more closer, because we were just two people together at the union who knew each other. Like some of them were friends, some of them were romantic partners, some of them were people there to meet to talk about a class project. And it didn't seem to matter how close they were, it wasn't moderated by that. So that was kind of fun. So that's all about how we know super diffusers are super diffusers. So we're feeling relatively confident that we've got relatively well-validated measures. So much so that a few years ago, one of my reviewers said, we get it. The measures are fine. Move on. If it was one of you, I accept that it's fair. We have done plenty of studies validating the measures. So what did they do? Well, I have pictures of my cats up here to sort of distract you from the fact that we haven't actually done much research on this. Hopefully you'll be noticing how cute my cats are, and that one cat is on a Michigan State blanket, by the way. So we've done a couple studies. One was my first authored article. It was in 2009, Argumentation Advocacy, then edited by Dale Hampel, friend of the program. So we just asked people, if you're going to try to persuade somebody about a particular topic, in one case it was dieting, a study that Mike had spearheaded. In their case it was, I think, quitting smoking. What would you say? This is a message production study. We then coded what they said. And we found that, again, the super diffusers were doing a better job. They were tailoring their message. We would give them information about the person. Like, they're trying to quit smoking, and they said this, they believe this, they believe this. And the super diffusers are more likely to mention that stuff. They're more likely to tailor as we expect them to do. And again, that was my first author paper, so thank you, MSU. Thank you, Frank, for trusting me to be willing to write up that paper. And we also found more recently, as I said I did with my colleague at WIU, Josh Averbeck, we're looking at what do you do online if you're trying to persuade people. And we were looking at politics. If you're trying to persuade somebody about politics on Facebook, what do? You give them a bunch of measures. And we had about 300 undergraduates fill this one out. And created some new self-report measures about broadcasting persuasive messages via the sort of end of Facebook that allows you to just post a status update that everybody can read. Versus we also asked them about tailoring. Do you try to ask little things in the comments, post on people's walls, that kind of stuff, where you're directly targeting one person. And we found that that mavens in particular were more willing to do both. They were generally reporting they were using broadcasting messages, or just posting status updates about topical things, and they're also tagging people in posts, trying to persuade them in the comment section, probably annoying their friends. Because I remember I always think about a study I did a few years before that with a colleague at Oklahoma, Ioana Chonia, where we just asked an open-ended question: if you're going to try to persuade somebody about politics on Facebook, what would you do? And the most common response from students we got was, I wouldn't, that's rude.
Wow.
But our mavens, they were up for it. They're going to annoy their friends. Say, have you voted? Hopefully you all are. But it was a bit disturbing. They're more willing to say things they regret. Another item was be mean, insult people, some kind of verbal aggression kinds of behaviors. So again, they're willing to be uncivil about it. They're willing to be a bit more aggressive, at least the political mavens. I kind of wonder if that varies by maven topic. So we did find some other data that I didn't get into with the big line data set, where mavenness does vary by personality. Like a sports maven is a different personality than a health maven is a different personality, like big 5 traits personality, than a movie one. So it may be hopefully limited to political mavens are willing to be uncivil. I don't know, I haven't replicated this one yet. It's been kind of on the list of things to do to see if health mavens are also jerks, basically. Stay tuned, maybe we'll find out in a few years here. And the cat, by the way, on the left, her name is Eleanor. And the cat on the right is Thalia. My wife named Thalia is the comic muse from the Greek muses. And she makes us laugh, so she's Thalia. So more about the campaigns. And here's a model we developed as with graduate students down in the basement in Frank's research lab. Those of you who really like computational modeling, this slide is for you. Those of you who don't, check your phones, think about lunch. So, you see up there, we're trying to predict the total number of people who have adopted behavior in a network. So we have a given network, and we're trying to figure out at time point 1, after time point 0 is 0 is the beginning, 1 is where we're at the end, whatever the end is this time point. The I up there represents the number of super diffusers promoting behavior change. Hypothetically assume that if they're roughly 5% of the population, we actually got all 5% on board. So you just plug in a 5% there. The next one up there is phi, the phi coefficient. It's the one with the circle with the I in the middle. For those of you who are not fluent in Greek, like Frank is. That's the proportion of contacts that they actually they convince. Is the basic success rate. And the lambda, the next one, the proportion of the population they contact. And then p, the population. Then the lowercase alpha there is a portion of the population that's already adopted. And you kind of multiply across, you get an answer. It's basically a simple way to plug in numbers. If you know how many super diffusers you have out there, you have some sense of their success rate, you know how many people they're going to contact, you know what the base rate of the population is, you can figure out what the population is going to be at the end. Or as we showed in that paper, if you know the last part, you can infer the middle parts. So we knew how many super diffusers we had, We knew how many people they contacted, assuming they weren't lying to us for money because they were getting paid. And we knew what the change rate was. You could then infer what their success rate was, which is the cool thing about the formula. You can plug stuff in, find different things about it. And of course, estimate campaigns. So again, it's kind of hard to make assumptions for some of these estimates sometimes, but the more research we do, hypothetically, some of those important variables in that model will get better estimates for, especially things like their success rate, which is one of the kind of unknown pieces of this data so far. And then we've tried to have a few campaigns. One is the initial one that we did for the internal grant that Frank had gotten for this project. We got 31 super diffusers at Michigan State. They all had 17 days, and we actually found an effect. Based on I think 2,000 student surveys that we'd given out before and after. We found an effect relative to Arizona State, where a good friend, and again, Michigan State graduate, Paul Manja, had basically done a before and after measure at Arizona State, because they're our control school, there's no campaign happening there for multivitamins. We had ours, and relative to them, we didn't see an increase, but we did see fewer people stop taking multivitamins during our 17 days. So we declared success, published the article in HealthCom. And then I also got a small internal grant at my university a few years back to try a super diffuser campaign with flu vaccines. So we knew that we had a flu clinic on campus. You went to Student Union for like a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, get a free flu shot. And so we got a bunch of people to fill out super diffuser measures and said, hey, the more people you get to go get a flu shot, the more money we will give you. First person gets $100, second place gets 90, 80, and on down. And then I had a graduate student just stand there at the end of the line saying, hey, you want to fill out a survey real quick for like chance to win $50? And almost everybody said yes. And their first question was, did somebody try to convince you to come here today? Yes or no? If yes, what was their name? Thanks, you're done. And we checked the names versus their super diffusers' names, and we found that they were more effective. Though one of the unfortunate parts was we had 121 people agree to promote a flu shot. We asked them in the survey, are you willing to actually try? And we found that, to be sure, super diffusers were more likely to say they were going to try. But a lot of them got 0 people there, which kind of let me think, okay, we have a problem. Super diffusers say they're interested, but we might need to do a bit more to motivate them. Our early work is like, well, just bribe them, that'll be fine. People like money. But even that wasn't enough. And so part of our issue had been thinking through, how do we actually get them? What do we need to do differently to get them off the bench, so to speak? How do we get them to want to jump in there and have conversations with their friends about flu vaccines? One example I give my students sometimes when we talk about this kind of stuff is, it can be kind of awkward. I mean, think about like a condom campaign. You want to show up to hang out with your friends, like, hey guys, who uses condoms? Who wants to talk about condoms? Condoms are great. Let me tell you about condoms. So sometimes you may have to motivate super diffusers a bit more to, even though they're mavens, they generally like talking about this stuff. It may be tricky to figure out how do we actually get them to start having those awkward conversations about flu vaccines, condoms, sugary beverages, whatever health thing we're interested in. So one of the questions we are asking, this is something that worked out with Mike, should we recruit vaccine mavens or health mavens? We did a couple of studies on this, trying to figure out maybe we should go narrower, because in that flu shot study we just recruited health mavens. Maybe we need to think about vaccine mavens. Did a couple of studies. The first one, just a online survey, 400 students. They had higher self-reported use of social media to promote vaccines. I mean, the base rates are pretty low. There's skewed distributions. Most people are not using social media to promote vaccines. But if they were more likely to be vaccine mavens, but not so much for the health mavens. And they were likely to know things about vaccines and health mavens, especially if you put both into regression. In the second study, we did the self-other test. So part of that one where we had my graduate students wander around the union handing people out surveys, we actually tried both versions of the Maven study. We had the vaccine Maven measures, and we also just replaced it with healthy. And both were actually equally effective. So in terms of the self-other, we thought maybe it's that you don't know as well if your friend is a health Maven, but you know for sure if they're a vaccine Maven, because it's narrower. Didn't seem to matter. Either way, the self-other worked, with almost identical correlations actually. But then the more interesting study is one that is, let's see, next slide. Yeah, there we go. This one I had to change the date on last night because it hit press yesterday. So it's 2024, it was in press, it did actually just appear in an issue of, I think, Com Studies, to check. So this one we dreamed up. We initially asked NIH for money for this, and the NIH said no. figure it out. And so we thought, okay, somewhere they said, we need proof of concept. We need to actually show this might work, and they might think about funding it. And so we did. We did a couple of studies, we just came out, and we're working on moving forward with this. But we started thinking, okay, how do we recruit super diffusers? What kind of messages do you use to recruit people to produce messages? And so we started thinking about what their self-schema was. How do they think about themselves? Like, what is their view of themselves? And can we use that to tailor a message to them? And so study one, we got a few hundred students to just take some measures we'd used from some other validated measures of different kinds of self-schema. And we found that in general that our health mavens in particular tended to have a very altruistic self-schema, especially altruistic about health issues, and a need for esteem about their topic area of health. And we then looked at see which one was the stronger predictor, and it was the esteem one, in terms of their willingness to persuade. And so we then sat down at the NCA in Seattle in Mike's hotel room and wrote messages. And we came up with a version of the message where it was, we were gonna create a student group to promote vaccines. And we had like a basic version, like here's what the student group would do. They would meet periodically, their job would be to promote vaccines. And then we also added a second paragraph for experimental condition, where it's like, and this group, by the way, is gonna be very important to people. They're gonna be consulted by administrators. They're going to get special badges and other recognitions of their important status as a part of this group. Now, would you be really interested in this group? And non-mavens still said no. But the mavens, this was catnip for the mavens. We definitely saw a bigger interest in the student group when they were gonna get a lot of esteem and be told how important they are for being a health maven. So that's where we're kind of moving forward. Another one at the bottom is something we haven't actually done yet, but I'm excited enough about it to talk about it. So Ted Apches, who's my colleague at Westmoreland University on our Quad Cities campus, and I put together a small state grant, just like $75,000, to promote, the grant was for like promoting digital equity, and we came up with the idea of basically going to different small towns in our part of the state and doing like an hour-long talk about online health literacy, things like health records online and other kinds of methods of interacting with the health system using the internet for people, especially from rural areas. I started to think through what's the super diffuser angle on this so I can get a real legit publication out of this. This is something we're doing this spring. And so part of our outcome measures, we're going to be measuring the extent before and after they are perceiving themselves as a maven in this area. And so our hope is we can create mavens by having these people show up to our training sessions and learn about these online medical records and the kinds of online health medical literacy. The other piece that we're hoping to do is come back to that area about a month or two later and see if people who scored high on the super diffuser measures recruited people that come to the next session. This is an area I've been thinking about a lot because more recently, I've been thinking very narrowly in what super diffusers do. They promote some sort of health thing. You know, drink fewer sugary beverages, get a vaccine. And since I've been working on this project with Ted, I've been thinking more a lot like, you know, you can give super diffusers to do practically anything, including like show up to a different thing entirely. So it's almost thinking about super diffuser projects that you can just tack on pretty much any kind of promotion project. Need people to show up to a thing, find super diffuser to have them show up to it. And so we'll see how this goes in the spring. It's the state of Illinois, and they've been slow in actually getting us this money. For example, they told us we would have it in July. We don't have it yet. But they're sure in just in a few more weeks, they're gonna have it sorted out. So we're hoping by January, we'll actually have gotten the money for the state of Illinois so can actually do the project. So I'm kind of excited about that one. The other project we're really excited about, show my next slide, is an expanded super diffuser model. And this one is in press, it's out in Commerce Search. And again, this is with some fine MSU graduates, Shannon Cruz and Reed Reynolds. And in this one, we started to think through, under what conditions is each of the three super diffuser traits unnecessary to accelerate diffusion? The classic model is somebody has a high on all three, accelerates diffusion. And of course, we knew there were probably going to be conditions in which that wasn't necessarily true. Maybe they didn't have to be a maven, they didn't have to be a connector, they didn't have to be a persuader. We never really thought through what those were. And so one time when I was, I think I had a flight delayed for an NCAA flight, I just pulled up a notepad and started to think through what they might be. The trouble with that is it's very hard to do 1,000 super diffuser studies to see if that's true. So we started to think through what these conditions might be though. So the connector, when do they need to be a connector and do they not need to be a connector to actually be an effective diffuser? One of the things we thought was important is the sizeless social influence effect. And in some literatures, the word very social influence means a lot of things. In this context, we're talking about modeling basically. So the sort of Bandura kind of thing, you see somebody do it, you do it too. You look at me and you think, that's a cool bow tie, where can I get a cool bow tie? I don't have to actually persuade you. Frank's shaking his head. I don't have to actually persuade you. You just see me doing it, and you want to do it too. This is a social influence effect, but the connector is super important, right? Because the other people are getting around, seeing lots of people, interacting with lots of people. If it's something like condoms, there's not much social influence effect because we usually don't see our friends using condoms. At least I haven't. But other things like, do they have an I voted sticker? Like you want connectors wandering around with their cool Michigan I voted stickers, especially the one with the werewolf, like the thing coming out of his. I was really, Eden was telling me about this morning. I'm very excited about your I voting stickers. You want connectors wandering around with I voted stickers. Because a lot of people are going to see them and think, oh, I should vote too. Another thing, the persuader, when is that important? When they have a higher actual threshold for behavior adoption, makes them more important, enhances importance of persuaders. So there's some things that's pretty easy to convince somebody to do. It's not hard to convince somebody to like try a sip of the new weird flavor of Dr. Pepper you have. They'd be like, yeah, all right, I'll try it. But if it's install solar panels on your home, which will cost you tens of thousands of dollars, they gotta love it. Like you gotta really want those solar panels, or have a lot of disposable income, one of the two. And there are other things that are just hard to adopt. If you're trying to convince your friends to say, quit drinking sugary beverages, and they start every day with a Mountain Dew, they have to really work hard, like to get them to make a major lifestyle change like that. So the persuaders we think are going to be particularly important then. It's especially the kind of thing that's going to be tougher for a traditional mass media campaign to succeed in, because it has to be a big change. I mean, no traditional mass media campaigns will give you an effect about that big, and that big, over 1,000 people, matters. But it's going to get just a little hanging fruit. And the harder to reach people, you're really going to need persuaders. And also a lower average attitude of the network at intervention start enhances it. So if your network hates the thing already, like when I was a kid, the only people who wore bicycle helmets were losers. Everyone knew this. No one wore bicycle helmets. And I'm sure that there are some kids in my neighborhood who suffered some injuries they probably didn't have to, because they didn't want to look like a loser. That's a very negative attitude. This is the 80s, and they didn't have the cool looking helmets they have kids have now. And so we all started with a pretty negative attitude, and we just never got there. I mean, I wear one now. Like I've got a great bicycle helmet. On the rare occasion when I actually get my bike out of the garage, I'm wearing that helmet. But there are plenty of things when the network starts out kind of against it. If you were to say, for example, drive, I don't know, 200 miles north. Are we still in Michigan 200 miles?
Yeah.
Yeah. And start knocking on doors saying, you know, you should vote for Vice President Harris. For some of those neighborhoods, the actual threat, the existing network attitude might be kind of low for that particular behavioral intervention.
True.
Same thing for about 20 miles from where I live, in almost any direction, really. And so that's another kind where you really need that persuader. Somebody can really adapt their message and figure out what that audience is going to need to hear. And then for mavens, and in the model I'm going to show you, we're really thinking about mavens. We're trying to differentiate these three traits very precisely, because the model is going to come and show you in a minute. Because they probably are also somewhat persuasive. But we were arguing was we rely on the persuader for that aspect. And for the maven, we're going to rely on them for initiating contacts and for being listened to. So our way we thought through mavens in this model is mavens are people who are people actually going to listen to. They're going to be motivated to talk to people in their social network, and they're going to have a social network who will listen. So basically the upshot is at any given time point of the last month, for example, they will have tried to persuade more people than anybody else. Because the persuaders don't really care about your topic. One thing I should have mentioned earlier is the maven is the only one that's topic specific. Persuader, any topic. Connector, those are topic. You just have lots of friends. The maven's the ones who care. And so we're thinking about why is it important for somebody to make a lot of deliberate attempts at persuasion? And for them, social influence, if there's no social influence effect at all, they're going to be particularly important. Because without them trying, without them deliberately initiating conversations, there won't be any diffusion. Because if there's a social influence effect, eventually people will change anyway, because it'll just spread. But there's not, if it's private behaviors especially, as we learned about the theory of normative social behavior from our resident norms expert, Ray Lipinski. If it's a private behavior, people aren't going to see it. There's really no social influence effect, no normative effect. And that's when you need mavens to actually make those deliberate efforts. And so how do you test all this if you can't do 1,000 interventions? Well, luckily, we can simulate them. And by 1,000, I mean more like 250,000. So this is why I especially brought in Reed and Shannon to help me with this. I took like a 4-week seminar on how to create agent-based models myself, And then I wrote up my own version of the code, and I showed it to Shannon and Reed, and they said, that's cute. And they made it better. We use a program called NetLogo. Basic idea is we create a simulated network of 100 agents, 100 people, if you will. And we create a network for them. They have a varying number of ties, like any other social network. Some of them have a lot of ties, some of them have a few. And we also actually tried simulating both 500-person networks and 1,000-person networks. And at the behest of one very stubborn reviewer, 10,000-person networks, which required some very expensive, very large computers at UMass Boston that Reed was able to get access to. Otherwise, it would have taken, I think, 6 months to run the simulation on my computer. So thank you, UMass Boston and your fancy computers, because we were able to finally tell that reviewer, no, it still works at 10,000, you're wrong, shut up. And they gracefully said, yeah, fine, accept. That's why it's at Commerce Search now. So the idea was, we can represent the idea of being a super diffuser in this model. You've got 100 people with varying connections. Connections represent the connectors. How many friends do they have? So degree between the centrality. Those who are not in networks, degree centrality is just how many friends you have, how many connections. And between the centrality is the extent to which you're grouping, you're crossing bridges. So you are bridged between groups. If you're like a college student, do you know people in the theater department? Do you know athletes? Do you know music people? Musical theater people, like connecting those groups. And basically, in a network like this, if there's clusters, are they bridging them? And then persuaders, the way we operationalize them, and I think Frank will grant me operational on this one. I think it's fair because we're literally defining it very mathematically and saying exactly what it is. So I think it's fair to say operationalization. I can see Frank flinching, so he still disagrees. So I'll live. We're saying persuaders here are people who can cause a large change in their target's attitudes. Because one of the things we did was for each of these agents, we gave them an attitude toward the behavior on a scale of 1 to 7, just to mimic a Likert scale, or Likert if you prefer. A 1 to 7 scale, and we had them all below the midpoint at the start of the simulation. And a persuader can cause a bigger increase than a non-persuader. So it's basically a continuous variable, how big of a change do you cause in your target when you try to persuade them for each agent. And for their mavenness, that was the likelihood of them trying to persuade people at each time point. We call them ticks in agent-based modeling terms. So basically any arbitrary time point in an event, you could call it a week, call it a month, call it whatever. So each time point, a tick, they were more likely to try to persuade somebody in their network, somebody they're connected to. And so, this is what they look like, and if I can show you real quick. Switch to the other mic. You good? You good? Okay. That's it? You good?
Yep.
Done, okay. Let's drop out of here real quick. I'll pull up NetLogo. This is the actual model we created. And I can say, first of all, if those of you interested in agent-based modeling, it's a lot easier than it looks. Like the code really isn't that long. Like this was all the code we needed to run that. So it's actually a fairly computationally simple, roughly speaking. It's still coding. It still is a learning curve, especially for me. But from that, you can get all this. And so we set it up. Each time we get a fresh network. And you notice each time there are 5 of our little gingerbread people that are in red. The idea is that those 5 are the ones who are initially seeded the behavior. So they start off doing the behavior. They're the ones who have adopted the behavior. In theory, in a super diffuser campaign, they're the ones we said, hey, here's this behavior we want you to diffuse. You adopt it and tell other people. The question is, do those 5 people need to be super diffusers to make adoption go faster? And so we can either run this one tick at a time, which is slow, or click the wonderful go forever, and eventually all our people adopt. And we get our nice little S-curve. This is the number of adoptions on the y-axis and time on the x. Nice little S-curve as it goes faster. We have all these little sliders, so we can increase the number of agents, the minimum number of links. I set up a relatively looser network. Each person has at least 2 friends. We create a much more dense network if you want. So everybody's got 50 friends out of the 100. Make a network look like that, which is harder to see. The percentage you adopt at the start, that's the 5, basically. Their average attitude, up here we can adjust this, so we can have the average attitude be close to the midpoint. They're very easy to persuade, low or very low. The adoption threshold, similarly, you can have it like just at 4, the midpoint, make it much higher before they'll change their behavior. So once they change the behavior, for the simplified model, we assume they're not going to switch back, and once they've adopted, they can then persuade others. And the average persuasive power, the social influence effect, which we make 0, by the way, and set up, we get a lot of cases where we don't always get full diffusion. The social influence effect is 0. It has to be a one-on-one tie. Sometimes not everybody gets the message, because sometimes their friend or their two friends aren't interested in diffusing. They have very low Maveness scores. They're just not going to try to persuade anybody. And so we don't actually get full diffusion when social influence goes down to 0, which is one of the things we create an interesting outcome when we're dealing with this data, because we get these massive data sets. And at first nothing seemed to work. We realized social influence equals 0 crowd are very different than every other run of the model, because it's changing drastically how things are working. And for example, if you have any kind of social influence effect, eventually everyone will adopt, because they'll just see their friend. They'll get some kind of effect off of that, even if their friend doesn't want to persuade them. And if you make things that little bit of an effect, the adoption threshold really high, average attitude really low. Here we go. It's going to take longer to get there. It still gets there. Any questions about actually? Question. Yeah, go back to the slideshow. That's our fun little model. And what did we find in this model? Well, we did find each super diffuser trait contributed to diffusion speed, except between the centrality. That baffled us for a bit. We'll talk about that again in a minute. I think degree centrality importance did increase greater social influence effect. So how many friends you have, if you were one of the magic 5, the little 5 red gingerbread people at the beginning, then social influence effect did enhance the importance of those 5 being connectors. Persuader importance did increase, the attitude threshold increase, as well as average initial attitude decline. So if it was going to be a harder sell, simulated wise at least, it did matter if they were persuaders as initial 5. And for the Mavenness, their importance did decrease as the social influence effect got stronger. So if the social influence effect, the modeling effect was strong, being a Maven was less important. People were just going to do it because everybody else was doing it. You didn't need to be directly persuaded. You didn't need somebody to actually directly try to persuade somebody that they were connected to in our little picture of gingerbread people. And the thing though about the between centrality did kind of bug us for a bit. But then I was at NCA in New Orleans a couple of years ago talking to Shun Zhou, who's now at Kentucky. He's one of Rachel Smith's students that I'd worked on with the projects. And I pointed this out to him and he said, well, did you look at the clustering coefficient? I said, that is a good idea. The clustering coefficient is the extent to which people are clustering. Do you have a lot of clicks? Do you have a lot of separate groups? And when I made that a moderator, reran the data, reran the simulations, that was important. Between the centrality of the initial 5 only mattered if you had high clustering. So as you would expect, and I did feel a little foolish not thinking this myself, but it's good to talk to smart colleagues about your problems. They'll give you good answers. And we found, yeah, between centrality mattered a lot if there's a lot of clustering in your network. If people are forming separate groups, then you do need high between centrality. You need people who are bridging those groups. They do become important. But if not, less so. Then it's just sheer connection that matters. So something important to think through about networks and a good use of agent-based modeling in that it showed us something we hadn't thought of before. Because a lot of the criticism of agent-based modeling is this is all fake, you get whatever data you want to say whatever you want. But one of the cool things about it is you run these kind of simulations, is sometimes you find out things you hadn't been looking for. You find out surprising things that can sometimes really help push a research area forward. And at least in this case, we did find that out, which is cool. And we also realized how important it was to think through these cases where maybe not all 3 traits matter. And what I like about that is that it helps us think through going forward on doing more actual interventions. Do we always need to have all 3 traits? If you can really actually assess, for example, it's not that hard to get the average attitude of your target audience. Just do a survey, get a sample. It's not that hard to ask them, well, how much would you have to like this before you'd adopt this? People can tell you that kind of stuff. So some of these variables are things that can be self-reported. The network's a bit hard to figure out. I mean, doing a network analysis, those who work in that area know it can be difficult to get kind of data. But to some extent, some of those things can exist. And the social influence effect is usually something you can just almost tell. Like, how public is this? How private is this? Is it something people are going to know if you're doing it or not? I mean, you know whether or not your friends wear new shoes if you're at all observant. I'm not, but most people are. but you don't know if your friends are using condoms or not, unless you have very awkward conversations with your friends. So it's easy to actually start to think through what some of these are, at least demonstrate potentially that that's how it works. The other cool thing about this model is that we can start to think through other factors we haven't looked at before. One of the things you don't see in this model is, do people backslide? Will they change their mind back? There's no negative social influence effect. For example, you see people not doing the behavior. Does that cut your attitude at each tick? Or people who are not doing the behavior and actively trying to influence people not to do the behavior. So this is the kind of things you can actually start to slowly add in. I mean, our basic goal is to assess the basic model and the idea we're trying to get at. And then moving forward, we're hopefully going to start to be working on some of those more complex aspects of the model. Something that Shannon and Reed are excited about, and I'm excited about too. So we basically want to get this publication to press, send it to Commerce Search, you can read it now. And then we're going to start moving forward, making the more complex version of the model, and see if, again, the super diffuser ideas still hold up. So, what's next? Ask the NIH to fund a super diffuser health pilot study. One of our project ideas is that we would, Mike Taus is at the University of Tennessee. Shin Cho, I mentioned, is at the University of Kentucky. One of the things we've been talking about doing, we haven't actually quite gotten there yet, we've kind of forming ideas, looking at different kind of calls and that kind of stuff, is we do an intervention in Tennessee and make Kentucky the control school. Because they're both flagships, they're both Southern, there's a lot of similarities. They make a fairly good control school. And so we could try a super diffuser intervention on some topic. And it's one of the cool things about this research area is we don't care what the topic is. Like whatever the NIH wants to throw money at, we are happy to catch that money and spend it on super diffuser intervention. It could be flu shots, it could be sugary beverages, like whatever the hot health thing is, we are happy to have super diffusers try to persuade people to do it. So that's coming down the road, hopefully. Another is to use Digital Health Literacy Grant as a pilot project for further grant funding in that area. Today I'm just really kind of excited about getting that data and seeing if it does work, and then turning around and going for larger grants in that kind of area and expanding what we're doing, hopefully hiring more people to actually go out and do these interventions in these rural counties. And some of them are fairly rural. One of the counties that are included in our region of the state for this project is literally named Joe Davies County.
Joe what?
Joe Davies County. J-O space Davies. It's kind of become our example, well, we go to Joe Davies, we're really gonna have to drive. It's the northwest corner of Illinois. And hoping that if we get more money, we can hire people to start to do those presentations, so we don't have to actually drive around rural Illinois ourselves. And that's something we might ask for money for, hopefully, assuming the spring project works. It might not. You never know how the data is going to go. Of course, as I said, explore the Asian-based model some more, look at some of the more complicating factors, and think through what are the things we haven't added, what are the pieces of reality we haven't added. Because anytime you're dealing with Asian-based modeling, the more reality you can add into it, generally the better, within reason, of course, to try to assess what's actually happening. Because you're creating a model, and the models are only good as the assumptions that go into it. And so the more you can think through those assumptions, complicate the model more, add more features, because as long as you've got a decent computer, it can keep scaling up to more and more complex models and keep running them and see what kind of things happen. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is some of the work I've been doing on polarization in online communities with Bree McEwen at University of Toronto. One of the things I've been thinking through is we're looking at people who create polarization but unintentionally. So we actually created this model initially. It's called the Median Skewed Diffusion Issues Information Model, MISTI for short. But we created this model in response to a friend of ours who politically agrees with us, but posts nonsense all day on Facebook. He's retired, doesn't seem to have anything else to do. And the stuff he posts, we initially suspected it was probably actually polarizing even more. He's not persuading anybody, he's probably pissing off some Republicans. And so sort of think through what kind of online environments does that create? Is one piece of polarization not being in a silo, but the opposite, getting too much exposure to cross-cutting information that's terrible. And one thing I've been thinking through, are mavens contributing to this? Because we know it's people who are highly ego involved. We've got some studies showing that. And that's related with being a maven on that topic. So the mavens, the ones out there posting really mean, annoying memes. We've got a study that we presented, I think, IC a couple years ago, showing that it's the ego involved people who are presenting really cruel and pro-vaccine memes. They're probably driving people away from vaccines. And what if it's the super diffusers who are contributing to this? Something I'm going to work on as well is starting to work those measures into some of that work and see if it's predicting things. And of course, the one slide where we hadn't done enough yet is what do? There's still very much a black box in the middle of this model. Superfusers go out and do stuff. They try to persuade people by adapting their message. We don't know how. We don't know who they talk to. Is their friends? Is their acquaintances? Are they helping them? Are they offering social support, possibly, for helping them make these behavior changes? The kind of like dimly thought out piece of this model of the future is social support provision essential for this? For tough to change behaviors? Like if you're going to try to persuade your friends who smoke to quit smoking, that may not be a one-shot message from you, even if it's a great message. That may require like ongoing social support, which may be another piece of this, if using interpersonal diffusion to help promote those kinds of things. So that's hopefully coming down the road. I also want to thank all of my collaborators, and I've got names listed up here, especially my 2 master's students, Dharmika Vivarat and Shahid Rahman, who is now a PhD student at University of Colorado Boulder. I think it's Boulder. As well as all those people, many of whom are, of course, fine Michigan State graduates and former professors, especially Frank Boster, who got all this started because he read a book.
Just one.
Just the one. And he was really excited about it. And it spawned 19 years now of ongoing superfusion research. And I really appreciate you all coming to talk. I mean, listen to me today. And here's my cat again. If you have any questions.